Hello, dear beloveds. That just took a little while. I'm not sure what was going on there. I hope my internet is okay. So if it's sort of a bit weird or buffery, just let me know and I can switch over to my 4G. Hi, welcome to day 3 of our 17 days of archetypes. We have a little bit of, well, maybe we don't. I feel like there's 2 archetypes that would like to chat today, and maybe they're sort of knit together. So I think I'm going to go with what was presenting or who was presenting herself in my devotion this morning. And she's a fairly obvious choice leading on from who we were working with yesterday. But then just before we were going live, one of the shadow archetypes popped up. So I have a feeling that what I need to do today is actually speak to you about the archetype that I'm going to share today, both in its shadow and its light form. And this is certainly something that I experience a lot in the work that I do in training women as priestesses. We can also find it a lot in the spiritual community, and I'll break that down and talk about what I'm talking about with you when I introduce you to the student. So we have this glorious image from Christy Jameson from the Sacred 13. And I'm just going to read to you what's on the back of her card today. And really, when the process of creating these cards was that I wrote the words, and the words were really just an absolute download. And as I say that, you know what I mean. I was awakening to that aspect of myself, and each one of them spoke so clearly from me to me as me. But this student really brought a new level of understanding around what it is that the student archetype within us can offer us. And it might seem like it's lesser than the teacher, but in fact, there is no teacher without the student archetype. There is no student without the teacher archetype. And what I mean by that is that if you ever meet a teacher who stops being the student, then run as fast as you can, because they've lost humility and they're probably in that shadow side that I mentioned yesterday of the guru. But likewise, if you meet a student who's never willing to step up and out and to actually offer and share her wisdom, then we have a shadow side of the student. And I'm going to talk about that more because that's what I was alluding to before. But in her balance, in her homeostasis, she's glorious. And I'm going to share with you now. So I am the closest thing there is to God in this dream, for I have the humility to sit in uncertainty and doubt, when all around me want the mysteries resolved. I will not stop seeking, and my restless agitation scares them. But I am the one who inspires the teachers, the dreamers, and the creators. My restless yearning sits inside their souls and begs them to go deeper and vaster and wider, so that I may make a seat at their feet and feel the bliss of transformation that is my soul's true desire. And I just love her, and I love the image that so if you can't hear me, archetype. So the great and wonderful Shannon Bush has another system of archetypes that she speaks about, and one of the archetypes that she references is called the shapeshifter alchemist. Now, when I work as I do with women who are on this path, I encounter the shapeshifter alchemist all the time. And what this archetype means, in part, it's not the full understanding, is really in regards to our unwillingness to kind of commit to one course of action or one course of study, or to go deep into one thing. We can be very flighty and flippant and kind of jump from one teacher to the next, one program to the next, one book to the next, whatever way it is. We can't kind of form around something in a really solid way. Now, there's lots more to that archetype according to Shannon's work, so I'm really just sharing just a tiny aspect of it. But it is definitely an aspect of coming into a program like the third level, for example, where I will invite women to put down all other programs and to put down all other kind of texts and all other seeking, and to sit with their student and really be deeply committed to being curious around what it is they're doing in the third level program. And there's a reason for that. And that's because I think the antidote to so much of our superficial spirituality, or this kind of jumping from one thing to the next, is to anchor into something for a sustained period of time. So the invitation from the student today is, where are you avoiding meeting yourself in your fullness by jumping from one thing to the next, by having a very superficial relationship with great texts that you read? So for example, if you were, a student of A Course in Miracles, I mean, that's a lifelong text. Or even if you read The Power of Now, or, Women Who Run with Wolves, or The Disappearance of the Universe, any of these great texts, to pick them up and put them down, like pick them up, read them, and then go done, is really a sign of arrogance. And it's this kind of intellectualization of spirituality, which is the death of the embodied spirituality, which is the death of true spirituality, because knowledge is meant to be experienced to become wisdom. And so the student is counseling us to avoid this kind of constant flurry of running from one thing to the next, which is actually the way of avoiding meeting ourselves in our God nature, our infinite nature, and instead come home to roost with the self. Because, of course, the ultimate truth of the student is that the teacher is within, and that it is the teacher-student alchemy, both within us and in our relationships with others as our teachers, that creates true learning, true transformation of wisdom, knowledge into wisdom. So for me, I speak of this idea that my service is my medicine. Every woman who comes through the temple of the third level is my teacher. And if I were to ever get that wrong, if I was to ever think that it was the other way around, even though my job is to guide that woman, they are in service to my awakening. And that is the great privilege of when your work is your service, because your service then is your medicine. So the student is here really to invite you today to put down your superficial relationship with your devotion, if that is what you're a student of, which many of you will be. We're speaking specifically about being a student on the path of awakening, and to go deep into something. And rather than distracting your ego, reasoning, conscious mind with this and that and this and that, and just to kind of, be distracted by every bright, shiny object, what would it take to get uncomfortable with something, to sit deeply enough with something that you let yourself get uncomfortable? Because usually what happens is, as soon as we start to reach truth, we get uncomfortable. And as soon as we get uncomfortable, we're like, oh, well, this mustn't be right. Wrong teacher, wrong book, wrong person, wrong course. I'm just going to move on. I thought it was something that wasn't. And 99% of the time, actually, the work is working, and you're just getting to the good bit. And that's where you need to find the courage that the true student has in her willingness to go deep in the depth of her being, that she will stay long enough to become masterful at something. So this idea of really learning something so deeply that you become masterful is where the student comes out of the shadow and moves into her true inheritance, which is the teacher. To be the student with no intention of transferring that knowledge is dangerous. That is the shadow. That's the accumulation of more and more spiritual knowledge just for the self. Like you become this like Aladdin's cave, where you just keep hoarding your wealth with no intention of sharing that. And that, that reaching back or leaning forward, sharing that wisdom that you attain is our way of integrating what we learn. And so it's very, very important that we never we avoid staying entirely in the student archetype, because we're breaking the law. We are being, if you like, handed a treasure that perhaps others don't have access to, or don't have the time to invest in, or don't have the wealth to invest in. And our task is to see that as a sacred responsibility, to pass that information on, and to be the careholder of that knowledge, not the jail guard of it, which is very, very powerful shift. So you may not recognize that the low self-esteem that sits in the shadow of the student archetype, that who am I to teach this? I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. I haven't studied enough, is actually just evidence probably that you haven't sat long enough with something, firstly, but more importantly, that it's a way of avoiding the responsibility of the knowledge you're attaining. If you never feel ready, then you never have to show up to transferring that knowledge on. What a convenient way to get out of having to ever step into your power. So the student is inviting you to be humble enough, curious enough, willing enough to sit in that I don't know, and the curiosity to know that you can lead from that space. It does not require you to have it all figured out. It just requires you to have the discipline to be willing to go deep enough. So I just will open it now to any questions you might have for the student archetype and anything you would like to, ask around this, because it's something that I think is so important for us at this moment. Part of the world that we're leaving behind, if we have the courage to do it, is the superficial spiritual culture, this spiritual retail therapy, where it's trying to buy something that's going to get us where we want to go, and avoiding doing the hard work and the sitting for the long hours and the reading and going deep into the meditations and the texts to actually embody that wisdom. And that's why my third level is a year. Even though I could take the curriculum and probably give it to you in 3 months, it would be doing you a disservice, because the knowledge to become wisdom takes time, and really the year is only just the beginning of that as well. But I'm very, very excited about the possibility of, if we put down the superficiality, if we don't do it on purpose. I'm not saying that we're bad people and we're intentionally being retail therapy, junkies, spiritual junkies here. What I mean is that we don't know how to work with the discomfort. We haven't been taught how to sit in that space. And it's actually a skill. And it's a skill that if we are willing to attain it, will ultimately be our freedom. And that is the absolute purpose of the work that I do and the women that I train, is to take them to that place where they can learn to sit with the discomfort, because that is the growth zone. And I was just having this conversation this morning with one of my beloved baby priestesses. To sit in that growth zone can feel like something's going wrong when actually everything's going right. You're just unlearning a lot of habits that have kept you stuck in a space that is not serving you. So that's really what the student has for us today. And I think there's such potency in that, in terms of birthing this new order of what it is that we want to bring into the paradigm around the spiritual conversation in the world, an antidote to using our spirituality as a way to kind of, absolve us of discomfort. Actually, the opposite is true, and the student is well aware of that. But to step out of the shadow of the student is to accept the divine responsibility that if I walk this path, then my task is to share that knowledge. Emma says, what is the best way to release the fear of not feeling like you know enough to teach? Teach something. Just take what you have and offer it. And you're teaching all of the time. This is the thing. We are actually in that teaching role all of the time. But create a way that you can transfer knowledge. And that doesn't have to be paid. It can be entirely voluntary. You can do it as a community service if you want to. But offer what you have attained in deep humility, as I know you always would. I am not necessarily the greatest, most expert person on this subject, but what I do understand is from my lived experience. I have worked with these tools, just as, I will never teach you anything that I haven't embodied and practiced and practiced and practiced. There's no point in that. So just take action to create a circuit breaker between the ego's desire to keep you stuck, that inertia around, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I don't know enough, and just take action knowing that every time you sit on something that you should be sharing, someone out there is not getting the wisdom that you could be offering them. And that is something we need to really understand, is that if we've been drawn towards studying something deeply, that's because it's part of what we have to offer to the world. And when we shift out of that mentality that it's about my readiness, and we remember that it's about God's readiness, that is the humility of the student. That is when you step into your teacher in the right way, in right action, because the teacher is just the flip side of the student in right action. It's a beautiful question. Thank you for sharing that, or asking that. So I think if there's no other questions, I will leave that there. But I really encourage you to look at the places where you might be sort of, just kind of dipping in, rather than going deep, because it's convenient to just be like, well, I don't know enough about this, and just to jump from one thing to the next. And what would it take to deepen into something and to really sit still at the feet of a teacher, or inside of a program, or with a text, or in a meditation practice, and give yourself a good amount of time to go deep and really become masterful at what it is that you are learning. And yes, it is in the doing that we really attain that wisdom. All right, dear beloveds, thank you so much for being here with me on day 3 of our archetype adventure. I will be back tomorrow. I think tomorrow I have to do a slightly different time, but Friday will be 2 p.m. As well. And then we will, we'll see who we get in the next couple of days. I'm loving having them just show themselves to me. So our beautiful student here today. So much love to you all. Bye.